I have not heard the phrase digital terrorism or even cyber terrorism used the way that it is over here.
There is no such term as digital terrorism or digital terrorist within our legal framework.
But we have a real problem here. I mean, let me play devil's advocate. If the army chief is personally attacked, memes are circulated, his family is being attacked, fake videos, how does that need to be tackled then?
There is no concept of defaming a state institution. What is criticism is now being taken into, the terrorism domain, which it is not.
And the purpose of any law, whether that's a defamation law, it's to protect the reputation of an individual. It is not to protect the reputation of an institution.
The Pakistani army's spokesperson has criticized people who've been attacking the army from within the country and from outside, and he's labeled them as digital terrorists. Now, this label has got a lot of people worried, and people are asking each other, what does a digital terrorist mean? We have two guests today with DawnNews, Farieha Aziz, she's a digital rights activist, and Rida Hosain, who's a lawyer and also a human rights activist. First to you, Farieha, is this peculiar to Pakistan, given all the concern about lies and propaganda and disinformation, or is this part of a global trend?
I have not heard the phrase digital terrorism or even cyber terrorism used the way that it is over here. So digital terrorism obviously is something that's been coined and we've been hearing in the presses, right? And cyber terrorism, which is defined in the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, is supposed to be confined to in relation to certain kinds of offenses like breaching data, etc., state infrastructure. That is what typically cyber terrorism should mean, except, as you are also aware and we all know, cyber terrorism is routinely applied to journalists, political dissidents, even though the offense is not made out. So colloquially, and also in terms of how we apply and use these terms, it's in the Pakistani context specifically for, political dissidents.
Now, we've heard from the army spokesperson that he thinks that people who are, for example, criticizing the army for its political manipulation, or people who are criticizing the army leadership, for example, that amounts to terrorism in his view. Rida, can you explain, does this fit the definition?
There is no such term as digital terrorism or digital terrorist within our legal framework. It's just not defined. So when the government or government representatives, or as you said, the military spokesperson, they use terms such as digital terrorist or digital terrorism, I'm not clear what it means, and the law doesn't define it. So really no one knows what they mean when they use these terms. As Farieha said, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, peca, defines cyber terrorism. There are a lot of issues with peca, the way that it defines offenses. They're vague, they're overly broad. But even the offenses as defined in peca do not cover the kind of situations which are being presented in the press, by the government and by government representatives. So what is cyber terrorism, which is defined under peca? It would include a situation where there has been unauthorized access of a critical information system or critical infrastructure data, which is then used to coerce or intimidate the government, or used to create a sense of panic or security within the society itself, or if there has been an unauthorized copying or transmission, again, of a critical information system, which is then linked again to the fact that you're trying to create a sense of terror within the society, or if you're glorifying terrorism, or you're glorifying a prescribed banned terrorist organization. These are the kind of things which would fall within the scope of cyber terrorism.
Farieha, as we've seen in so many cases, cases that you have also handled, invariably the charge on a critic, whether they are journalists or political activists, is that they were posting things against the army which could cause panic in the country, which could lead to civil war maybe in the country. If that's how the army interprets it, then they would see it as terrorism, right? If there is a sustained campaign to defame the army chief, the top generals or judges, they would then see it as terrorism.
You see, and again, when these phrases are thrown around, and as Rida rightly pointed out, they have no legal basis, right? So this is essentially a narrative building. You are labeling people in a certain manner. Really, our tweets and our certain posts on social media causing that sense of panic and security? And if they are, then that's really a comment on what is this level of state infrastructure and security that a tweet really holds you hostage, right? So there has to be, also with the whole defamation of institutions and defamation of public officials, and we've been going back and forth over this. One, sections of peca that don't apply are applied, for example, Section 20 and others, right? So routinely we'll see in FIRs that state officials and institutions have been defamed. And there is also, and Rida can speak to this better, there is no concept of defaming a state institution. A private individual has the right of dignity, etc. That's a completely different thing, which is primarily the problem with the Punjab defamation law as well, right? Because you've tried to bring institutions into the fold in public office holders. So again, the branch of government, there's always a higher threshold. You should be able and are able to criticize. That right now, it's being conflated. What is criticism is now being taken into, the terrorism domain, which it is not. And so we have a real issue with terrorism, but that's not what you're addressing. The security of citizens is actually threatened. But what about the threats that citizens receive from terrorist or outlawed groups? And we don't see the law coming into action there.
So look, I hear you both about, the definition of terrorism being applied to critics. But we have a real problem here. I mean, let me play devil's advocate. If the army chief is personally attacked, memes are circulated, his family is being attacked. You look at what is happening with the information minister in Punjab, Usma Bukhari, fake videos. How does that need to be tackled then?
Even when it comes to the definition of terrorism, it's not enough that for the purpose of cyber terrorism, at least, that you defame the armed forces or you defame a judge or you defame a public official. For cyber terrorism, there's a requirement that it attacks some sort of computer system. There's a very limited sort of definition within the law itself, even though I think it's problematic, but it is limited to an attack on an information system, which is then linked to a sense of insecurity. I completely agree with Farieha that institutions cannot be defamed. Institutions do not have reputations. It is completely absurd to say that the armed forces have been defamed or the judiciary has been defamed. Individuals have reputations. And the purpose of any law, whether that's a defamation law, it's to protect the reputation of an individual. It is not to protect the reputation of an institution. The government and often its spokespeople, they give examples of Article 19, that Article 19 has reasonable restrictions and we are imposing reasonable restrictions. But if you look at our jurisprudence on this by the courts, it says that these reasonable restrictions have to be interpreted narrowly, they have to be interpreted strictly, and you cannot suppress free speech under the guise of imposing reasonable restrictions, which is what we often see. Now, defamation, yes, it is a problem and it should be dealt with. People should not be defamed. I'm not advocating for that at all. But the way that this government is going about it, it's all wrong. They've created a law which gives special protection to constitutional office holders. So now, in theory, you could see the Chief of Army Staff or the Chief Justice of Pakistan filing claims against citizens for defamation. And also the law says that they don't have to personally appear.
Are you seriously saying that if a sustained campaign is being run, against a top general or his family, they should file a defamation case? That would be the proper way of handling criticism?
No, not at all. I'm saying that the law that they've passed, it's giving them this authority, which in my view is not the proper way to deal with it. If you're a public official and you're in the public eye, you need to bear more criticism, you need to bear more critique, because that is what the international jurisprudence on defamation is, that if you're in the public eye, you are more susceptible to criticism and you can't apply the same standard that you would apply to a private individual that you do to a public official.
Fair enough. So Farieha, I mean, clearly defamation is not terrorism, right? I mean, whatever concerns our government officials have, they, I guess, mostly fall in the domain of defamation, but not necessarily terrorism.
Actually, Shahzeb, I would say it's one, definitely not terrorism, and neither is everything that they make out to be defamation to begin with, right? So criticism is not defamation. You have defenses that don't come into play, and you have laws that are used. So let's also distinguish between criticism versus of public office holders versus, let's say, if families are being attacked, right? So a meme is a very different thing, and a meme can go in any sort of category. But if it's a data leak, if you're private, because families are private individuals, if minors are being attacked, etc., that's obviously a line that should not be crossed, right? And ethically, we recognize this, whether it's in relation to any office holder. Similarly, like you mentioned, whether it's Asma Bukhari or anybody else, even the chief minister, certain kinds of things do cross a line. But what is the appropriate remedy available and response to it? I have dealt with cases of scores of women who have sexualized, morphed images online. They go to the FIA. FIA does nothing, even if the cases proceed. Files are lost, or there's victim blaming and all kinds of things. So if we're not here to cater to the average individual, women, journalists as well, and others who are routinely issued rape threats, death threats, morphed images, blackmail. None of that matters to the government when it comes to actually protecting anybody or enacting laws. But when it comes to them about a meme, a comment, they want the full force of the law to come into action. And that actually, we need to inverse this on the head, right? I completely understand that reputations and everybody has a right to dignity, but there has to be some threshold and there has to be some balance when we strike.
Thank you so much, Farieha Aziz, Rida Hosain, for this conversation. Yes, the country is facing terrorism on the ground in many parts of the country, but it seems that our law enforcement is more concerned about criticism in cyberspace. We will continue the conversation on Dawn English, but for now, thank you so much.